From the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., this is Update One, the club's official podcast. It features newsworthy stories originating from the NPC facilities, as well as broader topics related to journalism, communications, press freedom, and transparency.
I'm Tom Young with the National Press Club's Broadcast Committee in Washington. Author and military veteran Matt Gallagher brings a unique perspective to his reporting on the war in Ukraine. He has traveled to Ukraine as a journalist and as a volunteer with a team training local civilians in self-defense tactics in a combat environment. His articles for Esquire place the reader side by side with Ukrainian civilians turned fighters defending their homes. Matt joins us by phone from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
You've said you first traveled to Ukraine as a journalist, but then realized you wanted to contribute something besides becoming just another reporter there. Tell us about what you wound up doing.
So our first trip there, I went alongside two fellow American military veterans. And in the city of Lviv in western Ukraine, we ended up working with a group of civilians that were looking to just kind of learn some basics on self-defense in case the Russian invasion reached their city, how to defend their homes and neighborhoods. We didn't turn them into military commandos or anything, but we wanted them to have some confidence that if and when they chose to pick up a rifle to protect themselves and their families, they had some capabilities, that they weren't just going to go die needlessly in the street. It was very fulfilling work. We worked with them for 3 weeks, and some of those folks ended up joining the Ukrainian military after we left. Some remained civilians in Ukraine and are contributing to the war effort in other ways.
And talk about some of the challenges you faced as a trainer in Ukraine. I would imagine it's very different from training U.S. troops who've been through basic training.
Oh, very much so. I mean, these were not soldiers. These were everyday people, bus drivers, teachers, welders, folks who never thought they'd be in a position to have to do anything like this. But here they were. At the time, we know now that the Russians didn't reach that part of Ukraine, that they were turned back at the Battle of Kyiv. But at the time, the possibility of the invasion reaching them was very real and very prescient. And, they showed up very dutifully every morning, coming to work hard, to learn maybe just one or two things that they could add to their skill set if and when they needed to employ it.
That's pretty impressive. Your story of traveling to Ukraine initially to write about it and then needing to contribute something else reminds me a bit of George Orwell. He went to Spain to cover the Spanish Civil War, and he wound up a soldier. Perhaps that made him the ultimate embedded reporter. Now, some journalists favor strict objectivity, keeping the reporter at a certain remove as purely an observer. But I would think if you really get down in the trenches, you get a perspective you can't obtain any other way.
Well, first, I appreciate that comparison because Orwell's Homage to Catalonia is an all-time book on my library shelf. But yes, both in my writing about that first trip and then my subsequent ones as a journalist, capturing kind of the everyday human experience of what Ukrainians are going through, both the soldiers on the front line in the trenches near and around Bakhmut, and then also just kind of the everyday people in the towns and cities further away from the front, but very much under threat of cruise missile strikes or artillery strikes. What their lives are like in kind of this constant warfare that is nearing its second year, and really no end in sight as far as how long this is going to go on and endure, and how that's changing and impacting an entire culture and society.
The headline to your most recent Esquire article said there are only two options left in Ukraine. Tell us about that latest trip to Ukraine, and what are those two options?
Right. That trip occurred in August 2023. Spent the better part of the month there, traveling various parts of the front all the way in the far north in Sumy Oblast, down to the Bakhmut area in the east, and then down to Kherson in the far south, which was recently liberated by Ukrainian troops a few months ago. But there's a lot of kind of river warfare that's been occurring between the two militaries. The two options, frankly, are victory or death. Even the most bitter, even the most dejected soldier I spoke with, and there's plenty of that. The grimness of everything has settled in. Knows that there really is no other choice but victory. They don't want to be enveloped by this Russian empire. And what I found fascinating, Tom, this grim resolve wasn't just kind of an empty platitude being spoken by those far away from the combat. In these kind of Russian-speaking villages and towns near the front, everyday citizens and the soldiers spoke very forthrightly about how much they resent Putin and Russia trying to take over. Some of them even admitted that before the war, their politics were Russia-friendly. But it turns out that an armed military invasion that kills young men and women that that kills innocent civilians that that destroys your village and town that you've lived in your whole life, that has consequences and an impact on how these people think, about their neighboring country to their north and to their east. So it's very grim. It's very dark, especially compared to those earlier trips where there was still, kind of a fresh, renewed energy surrounding everything. But the resolve is still there. If anything, it's deeper and it's more entrenched.
The thing that strikes me most about your reporting is the people you meet, the variety of folks who are volunteering to defend their country. Just to pick one, there was the artilleryman you said in peacetime would be the guy who shows up at all of his kids' soccer games.
Right. Kind of capturing a wide swath of Ukrainian society was important to me, to try to bring these stories home to Western readers who maybe are unfamiliar with the area, feel very far away and removed from the ongoing war, and try to be a bridge to remind these people that if not for geography, this would be us, right? Valari, the man you mentioned, was not a soldier before the war broke out. He was humanitarian. He was a weightlifting coach for high school and teenage athletes. He's since become an artilleryman fighting in Bakhmut because he wants a better future for his sons. Kind of a classic case of kind of a generational change. He's in his early 50s. He's more comfortable speaking Russian, but he's deeply proud that his sons are so fluent in Ukrainian. Kind of across the country, I heard this idea kind of expressed in different ways that, okay, even if you didn't think we weren't a real country before this, because like any place, Ukraine has geographical differences, economic differences, cultural differences across the country. If you didn't think we were a real country before this, well, we certainly are now. That being under the threat of Russian invasion and occupation has brought together these disparate parts of the country in a way that maybe didn't exist beforehand. You go to a different part of the country and you meet somebody like Fedor, who was a car mechanic before the war and was drafted somewhat reluctantly, but knew it was his duty to serve his country, and traveled to a part of Ukraine he'd never been to before, and without this war probably never would have been to otherwise. But then he gets there and he sees something in the air and meets the local people and realizes, no, this is my country. This is part of the reason I'm here to protect it and endure just real terrible hardship under miserable conditions, particularly in the winter.
And speaking of these fascinating characters you're meeting, there was also a 54-year-old historian who decided to help make some history, and a 44-year-old woman sniper.
Orest, the historian, who's now wounded and kind of completed the soldier's cycle and is waiting to be discharged. And then Elena, who's the real deal in terms of combat experience and tactical prowess, and is very much a threat to Kremlin propagandists, because it's embarrassing for them to be not only not successfully waging a war against their smaller neighbor as they planned. What was 72 hours to Kyiv was the original idea. But to be losing to a military that allows women to fight for it on top of it, somebody like her really infuriates them. She spoke very humorously but very candidly about the many numerous fake death announcements Russian media has spread of her because of this. Valari, the artilleryman we mentioned earlier, he spoke about kind of radio communications they pick up from the Russians in the Bakhmut area, claiming that it's the Americans and the Poles that are pushing them back because it's less embarrassing maybe to be retreating from NATO forces than it is from Ukrainians. But he said with a wry smile, unfortunately, no, the truth is it's just us. I wish the Poles and the Americans were here, but no, it's just us.
Wow. So how do these soldiers see the war ending? What's the end game for them? And for that matter, what's the end game for Russia?
I got a multitude of different answers. Elena, for example, feels very strongly that a firm military victory is the only way. Otherwise, they'll simply delay Russia's aggression, right? That a version of this will happen again. Another Ukrainian I met with, a platoon commander who goes by the call sign of Media, he kind of had a different view on it. He had a very kind of jaded take on the geopolitics of it all, that he believes that through some pressure from the West, a sort of treaty will be brokered that will allow Russia to maybe hold some of the territory they've gained in the war since, and that a sort of calm will settle in, but both sides will just continue to build up, waiting kind of for the next phase of the war. That even if there's an official announcement, neither side will really believe there will be an enduring peace. Now, that's just one man's opinion, and it should be noted that Zelensky and his administration have made it clear over and over again that they would not agree to such terms. But it wouldn't be the first time that even good politicians go back on their word in the light of geopolitical pressure. And, in the meantime, a stalemate is going to settle in, at least for the winter, right? It is with all the cover kind of gone and the deep freeze settling in. It seems very likely the lines that are drawn right now here in early December will remain this way at least through March.
Your background includes service as an Army officer in Iraq. So when you write about Ukrainians volunteering to defend their country, I imagine you have a pretty good idea of what they're signing up for, and I imagine that gives a fresh perspective to your writing as well.
I hope so that I have a decent understanding of what awaits them, but in many ways, this war is very different than the one that I fought in Iraq. Speaking with these Ukrainian veterans, as they talked about kind of endless artillery bombardments, having to deal with drones dropping munitions from the sky. That's nothing like what I dealt with or what any American veteran dealt with in Iraq or Afghanistan. We controlled the sky. We never had to worry about that. We had other things to concern ourselves with. But as I was listening to Orest, that the historian from Lviv, talk about the psychological terror of a long artillery bombardment. It sounded like something out of a World War I history book more than anything I saw or did in Iraq. So, I can maybe draw some connections from personal experience for the reader that help illuminate what these people are dealing with in defense of their country. But some things are just as foreign to me as they would be to most any Westerner.
As we record this podcast, American aid to Ukraine is becoming a hot-button political issue, and it will probably become even more so in an election year. So what's the status of equipment and supplies for Ukrainian forces right now?
They need artillery. that is something I heard from every Ukrainian soldier, no matter the rank, no matter where they were located in the country, no matter their own politics or their own feelings on how this war is being carried out. They need more artillery to match what the Russians are bringing to the fight. And it brought me great personal concern that perhaps we, as Americans, have allowed our government to kind of overmanage this, right? Okay, Ukraine's an ally. We're going to support them. Why haven't we completely trusted them with the weapons that they request and to use as they see fit? Are they or are they not an ally? There's been a lot of kind of partitioning out and allocations and for a few months here and there. And, my expertise is with these human stories. It's certainly not with the kind of Machiavellian geopolitical chess games that have to be played with something like this. But it's hard to hear these personal testimonies again and again and again talking about how they need more munitions, particularly artillery, while fighting a war that, frankly, we would never ask our own troops to try to do. To try to advance on foot that way at an artillery disadvantage, we would never, ever have American troops do that. The outrage here amongst our population would be tremendous. It was hard to hear these personal testimonies and not come back and wonder why we've been more devoted to half measures and worried about secondary and tertiary consequences rather than just helping our allies win.
You wrote about a Ukrainian intel unit that uses privately donated drones. Is that typical? Does the Ukrainian military often equip itself that far outside of normal supply chains?
Yes, both because they have to and because they're a very innovative people. In so many ways, I saw Ukrainians doing things that made me think that they kind of are what Americans think we are, right, in terms of being freedom-loving, in terms of finding very creative solutions under dire circumstances, in terms of kind of crowdsourcing and unifying as a country and a society. Those privately donated drones are one example. Carving out and kind of creating on the fly munitions for these drones was another example. I saw this across the country where kind of the big for all the money, for all the weapons support the West has been sending Ukraine's way. Sometimes it just doesn't reach the front lines. Perhaps there are some abnormal reasons for that. Perhaps there's some very normal reasons for it. Well, what do good soldiers do? They adapt and they overcome, and that's what this group was doing. Okay, it's not coming through official channels. Well, I know some people back home that want to help out, and here we go. We got this drone, so we can match what the Russians are sending our way. It's both inspiring and also, frankly, enraging, given kind of the broader politics of what's going around the war, and then meeting these guys at the front and seeing how they're actually living and what they're actually doing. The reality being broadcast on TV by well-intentioned people sometimes is not the reality in the trenches. And yet here they are showing up dutifully every day, protecting one another, protecting their families back home. Because if not them, then who?
Well, speaking of the version of reality that's depicted on television, how do you rate the quality of most American reporting on Ukraine? Are there things reporters often miss?
Well, it's fallen off a ton as Western attention has waned. There are some great writers and reporters that have spent time in Ukraine. Luke Mogelson's dispatches for The New Yorker come to mind. Matt Bishop for Rolling Stone. Sergio Olmos. These are thoughtful, good writers risking themselves to get deep human stories for Western audiences to perhaps better understand. I do worry that as attention wanes to other terrible things happening across the globe, that there's going to be less and less of this. For me personally, I write the kind of stories that I want to read about. These these everyday citizens who have become soldiers, who had entire lives and dreams and ambitions that had nothing to do with this only 2 years ago. That's all been upended, and showing how that's changed them, showing people why they made the decision they did, and what that means, not just for the individual's profile, but also for their families. That's my goal every time I go over there and put together a piece is again to remind readers, if not for geography, this very well could be you or me. And what would you be doing if you happen to be born in Mariupol instead of Baltimore?
Excellent question. You alluded to this a bit earlier, but when Russia first rolled into Ukraine, a lot of observers expected a quick Russian victory, and of course that did not happen. Why do you think Ukrainian forces have exceeded all expectations?
A few different reasons. That kind of fierce national resolve that we all saw in March 2022 is very real. It's very pronounced, and that's a testament to the Ukrainian people, not just the fighters. A lot of training from NATO forces occurred between 2014, after kind of the first Russian invasion into Donbas, between 2014 and 2022, and built up a very capable professional force, and turning the Russians back in the Battle of Kyiv really was a testament to that work that was put in, sometimes slowly, but always steadily in those 9 years. And another aspect of it, frankly, is the leadership of Zelensky. He was a great unknown. He's not really the guy that I think American power brokers would have preferred to have won that presidential election a few years ago. They wanted the other guy. He won. Ukrainians were looking for something different. They were looking for something fresh. But you talk to him, and no one was more surprised that he turned out to be the kind of man that he is, frankly, more than even some of the Ukrainians that voted for him, showing that maybe these old world ideals and values of leadership and resolve and bravery and moral courage, those still matter in the 21st century. And, seeing Ukrainians from, the everyday car mechanic turned soldier that we interviewed all the way up to Zelensky, kind of talk about these notional ideas of freedom and independence and democracy in a very proud and forceful way. I think it's important for us as maybe people from a country that take those things for granted to remember those things are to be fought for, are to be treasured, are to be protected. Even if you don't agree with me on that, I hope that most listeners would agree that let's try to be the America that Ukrainians sometimes think we are. Because, despite our many failures, our many blunders over the past few decades, the fact of the matter is, at least in that part of the world, we are seen as a beacon of hope. And I know how that sounds to some people who might be skeptically inclined, but it's very real. I saw it every day I was over there, and talking to people. If they heard me speaking American English, they were coming over to thank me just for being there. And as an Iraq veteran, I promise you, I've been places in the world where that is not, for very understandable reasons, that was not always the reception I received in living rooms elsewhere in the world. And it's worth bearing in mind as we consider how we, as American citizens, can choose to support Ukraine from far away.
Your books include fiction and nonfiction, and your newest comes out in February. It's a novel titled Daybreak, set in the Ukraine war. Matt, can you tell us a little bit about Daybreak?
Sure thing. As you mentioned, it's a novel, and it tells American veterans who fought in Afghanistan into the city of Lviv in late February 2022. Han Lee is looking to join the fight. He wants to join the International Legion and return to combat because he's found civilian life deeply unsatisfying. And the other, the protagonist, is named Luke Paxton. He's kind of going for more muddled, ambiguous reasons. He's wants to help because he has some dark, complicated memories from his own service in Afghanistan, and sees this as kind of a different type of cause that he can be a part of. But he's also looking for an old flame, a Ukrainian woman named Svetlana that he once cared very deeply for 10 years before, and kind of associates losing her with when everything in his life started going wrong. So, it's loosely, very, very loosely informed on some people I've met in my travels and conversations I've had. But, with any good fiction, I'm trying to tap into maybe a deeper emotional truth. And, not just of the American military veteran experience, but also of this war and what Ukraine is being forced to go through and endure against their will, against an unjust military invasion that happened to occur because they're next to a larger neighbor that wants to dominate them.
We've been talking with Matt Gallagher, an Iraq War veteran, a journalist, and the author of 4 books. Thanks so much for your time, Matt. I'm Tom Young, reporting for Update 1 from the National Press Club in Washington.
You have been listening to Update 1, the official podcast of the National Press Club, the world's leading professional organization for journalists and a vigorous advocate of press freedom worldwide. If you have any questions or comments about Update 1, send an email to update1podcast@gmail.com.